Good afternoon and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today we're discussing 4 cold cases that were solved recently with new DNA evidence. Let's get into it. On April 24, 1980 in Sacramento, California, a horrible discovery was made. Robin Brooks had missed her shift at the donut shop she worked at. The 20-year-old had recently moved to the area from New York and worked 2 jobs to afford her new apartment. She was last seen the previous evening. She worked a late shift at the donut shop and finished at midnight. She said goodbye to her coworker and left. Her apartment was only around the corner from the shop and should have only taken her minutes to get home. The next day, Robin failed to show up for her 4 p.m. shift, and her coworkers found that unusual. Robin was incredibly dependable, and it wasn't like her to not show up. A friend walked over to her apartment and knocked on the door several times with no answer. She knew something was wrong. She went back to the shop and got another coworker, and they forced their way into the apartment. Robin was found in her bedroom. Her friends described what they saw that day. She had been stabbed several times, and her killer had punctured her waterbed, making for an even more traumatic scene. The police were called, who also determined that she'd been sexually assaulted. Robin didn't have a car, and she only recently moved to the apartment, since it was closer to her job. There were no immediate suspects. Robin didn't have a boyfriend or anyone around her that may hurt her. None of her neighbors reported any disturbances that evening, but it would have been quite late when the attack occurred. The coworker that had seen her the previous evening remembered when Robin was telling her that she had washed all of her bedding before her shift, and it was unfair that she had to make her bed before being able to go to bed so late. Officers noted that Robin's bed was not made at the crime scene, leading them to believe that her killer likely attacked her soon after she arrived home. Her sister stated that she had been told by some friends that Robin might have had a stalker. In the days leading up to her murder, Robin had complained to friends that a customer at work had been bothering her. Officers had not been able to locate that man for questioning. At the crime scene, officers were able to recover some evidence. Most notable was DNA evidence found at the scene. A sample of blood determined not to belong to the victim was discovered, and it appeared that the killer had cut himself during the attack. There were also fingerprints on the windowsill indicating that's how the killer got in and out of the apartment. Though despite a thorough investigation, the case eventually went cold. A profile for the DNA evidence was generated years later, in 2004, but never came up as a match in state databases or federal databases. It did, however, link to a second victim that had been attacked and assaulted 3 weeks before Robin's murder. In 2017, Parabon Nanolabs created a genetic snapshot of the suspect. They used the genetic markers to make an estimation of what the suspect might look like. But the real break in the case came in 2020 when the DNA was approved for funding for genetic genealogy testing, and after 4 decades they had a match. Philip Wilson was arrested in April 2020 and was charged with the murder of Robin Brooks. The now 73-year-old would have been 30 at the time of the murder, and law enforcement discovered that he lived near Robin's apartment complex and had been a regular at the donut shop.
We never forget about the victims. In fact, in many respects, that's all we think about, our victims. Sometimes these cases take a little bit longer to solve than others, but none of them are forgotten. None of them are put on the shelf forever. And this, although is the latest case, I can promise you will not be the last.
These are cases that even challenge your hope. Hope that someday it may be solved, someday that you can bring justice for those families. What does that cold case, rape murder, do to that family member, those family members of that victim? Day after day, year after year, and in some cases decade after decade. Undoubtedly, they haunt them. They also consume their lives. Philip Wilson now stands charged in a felony complaint in Sacramento County with the rape murder of Robin Brooks.
He had never been a suspect and didn't have any run-ins with the law after Robin had been murdered. While in the trial, he maintained his innocence despite extensive evidence. His lawyer argued that they had a consensual encounter and that the blood evidence was from a workplace injury. The other sexual assault case that Wilson's DNA was linked to could not be brought into this trial, and he cannot be charged as the statute of limitations has expired on that case. Initially, the jury was hung on the conviction, but on March 9, 2022, they came back with a unanimous guilty verdict. Robin's sister, Maria Eric, said after the verdict was read,
"I feel like I can go on with my life now, because I think it absorbed a piece of who I was."
Wilson's defense attorney has indicated that they will likely appeal the conviction, but as of this reporting, they have not. Sentencing is set for sometime in April. It was a Sunday afternoon on November 6, 1983, when 11-year-old Laura Ann Weiser was walking home from a friend's house in Fort Pierce, Florida. Her parents noticed that she was late coming home. They called the friend that Laura had been with and discovered that Laura had left her friend's house hours ago. They did a quick search of the area, and when they couldn't find Laura, they went to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. Officers didn't take the disappearance of the little girl seriously. A large-scale search by law enforcement was never undertaken, but they did put out a BOLO, be on the lookout, sheet for her. A deputy came forward, James Howard Harrison, saying that he saw the girl walking near a gas station. Harrison had been on patrol that day she went missing, and it had been in his area of patrol. He gave the estimated time he saw her, and claimed to have continued his patrol without talking to her. Laura Ann was small for her age, but she was described as feisty and outspoken. Her family claimed she never would have gotten in a vehicle with a stranger, and that she was very street smart. There was disappointment that the local authorities didn't do more to find Laura Ann, and 3 days later, her body was found in a citrus grove less than 600 yards from her home. The medical examiner confirmed that she'd been murdered the day she'd been reported missing. Her cause of death was strangulation, and she had been sexually assaulted. 2 men that worked in the citrus grove had discovered her body. When they called the police, it was James Harrison who arrived first on the scene. The men said that Harrison took brief statements and dismissed the men. No one from the STCSO ever followed up with the men. Harrison was alone at the crime scene for 20 minutes before other officers joined him. The investigation had been brief, no suspects were ever identified, and the case was quickly filed away, not revisited for nearly 4 decades. In 2020, the St. Lucie's County Sheriff's Office established a dedicated cold case squad, and it was Laura Ann's cold case that was selected for the team to reinvestigate. Detective Paul Taylor was in charge of the investigation.
I mean, I can tell you the story of how that picture came to be, but there is a picture of her in my office.
Go ahead, I think it's important.
So that picture hangs above my desk every day. So basically, I lost my only child to suicide 5 years ago. There'd been a while after he died that I had no dreams of him, and it used to bother me, and it upset my wife that she wasn't having dreams of him. So one night I had a dream of my son, and I heard him, and he always called me Pappy. And I heard him, I'm walking somewhere, and I hear him yelling my name. And I'm looking around, I don't see him, and finally I see him coming up to me, and he's screaming at me, and he's like, "Pappy, I found her." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he gets right in my face, and he says, "I found her." And I'm like, "Who are you talking about?" And I looked over, and I saw Laura standing there. And she just looked at me and said one word to me, or one sentence to me, and she said, "Keep digging." And I woke up. So the picture, when I got into my office the next day, I pulled a picture of her out. She's standing in front of this little wall. She's just a little bitty girl. And I wrote on it, "Keep digging, Laura Ann," and stuck it on my wall, and it's been there ever since.
Early on, it was discovered that there were many holes in the initial investigation. Detective Taylor interviewed one of the men who had initially discovered Laura's body, and had been shocked that he was the first officer, besides Deputy Harrison, to talk to him. The man remembered that day vividly, and the crime scene, as he had explained that it had been a deeply traumatic discovery. He explained what he saw that day, with crystal clear details, but Detective Taylor had been shocked to realize that it didn't match what was in the file. The man had told him that Harrison had asked the 2 men to leave, which they thought had been strange. And what had been more strange was that no one else wanted to talk to them further. For the first time, there seemed to be a suspect in the murder of Laura Ann, and it was one of their own. Detective Harrison was also a preacher in the region.
Just to give you a little history, about 2.5 years ago, I made the decision to start a cold case squad. Detective Paul Taylor was picked as the person to lead that squad. And his job every day is to look through these cold cases and determine what else we can do to bring closure to these cases. He picked this case in particular because it was a child. And if you look at her picture back there, 11-year-old beautiful girl who was brutally raped, murdered, left in a drainage ditch in western St. Lucie County in 1983. As a parent, this case was easy for him to be vested in. And as this case progressed, there are some other turns to this case that really has shocked us all to our core, that being the arrest of a former deputy.
So based on the information that was obtained during this investigation of the cold case, detectives have named former deputy James Howard Harrison as the only probable suspect in the case. All right, and just pay attention to how I worded that, the only probable suspect in this case. The sheriff's office is unable to pursue charges against Mr. Harrison due to his death in 2008. We have established probable cause. As you know, probable cause is what we need to make an arrest. But we have established probable cause to determine that Harrison abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered the juvenile victim, and later altered the crime scene by placing the victim in a drainage ditch in an attempt to destroy physical evidence.
Taylor discovered that 5 months after Laura's murder, Harrison was let go at the sheriff's office. Several accusations had come forward that Harrison had molested several young girls in his church. Harrison also had complaints brought forward from within the sheriff's office as co-workers felt he'd been inappropriate with young women while conducting his duties as a deputy. Detective Taylor uncovered several definitive instances where Harrison directly tampered with evidence, moved things in the crime scene, and had hindered the investigation. Harrison was never charged. He was let go from his job and kicked out of his church, so he and his family picked up and moved. Harrison actually moved a lot, working in law enforcement in 10 separate agencies within Florida: Orange, Hernando, Osceola, Edgewood, Glades, and Okeechobee counties. Because he was never formally charged, he was allowed to just start over in a new county, using both the church and his uniform to maintain access to potential victims. James Howard Harrison died in 2008, and in 2020 his body was exhumed for DNA collection. DNA collected from the crime scene had been poorly stored, and conditions had degraded the sample, and they wouldn't be able to get a definitive 100% match. However, they are certain that Harrison is responsible for the murder of Laura Ann Weiser. Based on witness statements, the tampering of evidence, and the history of sexual assaults of little girls, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office have stated that they are certain that Harrison killed Laura Ann. They've also input his DNA into federal and state databases, and his DNA is being tested in several other cold cases in Florida to determine how many other victims he had. It was on March 20th, 1976, when Elizabeth Ann Wilson went missing from her place of work mid-shift. The 45-year-old mother was working an overnight shift as a spinner at a textiles factory in Chester, South Carolina. Halfway through her shift and last seen at the cafeteria around 3:45 a.m., a coworker said she saw her resume work around 4 a.m. and didn't notice anything unusual. Not long after, a security guard thought he saw Elizabeth Ann in a vehicle, a green and white Chevrolet belonging to the manager of the plant, and allowed the vehicle out of the facility. This wasn't unusual. The manager had been known to drive employees that were sick or if there was an emergency, and either took people home or to the hospital. However, it hadn't been the manager driving. When he finished his shift, he noticed that his car was missing and reported it as stolen to the police. At that time, it was noticed that Elizabeth Ann was missing. Around 7 a.m., a motorist noticed an abandoned vehicle on the highway. He saw what he believed to be a body under the car and went straight to the home of a nearby sheriff's deputy. They went back to the vehicle together and confirmed it was a deceased half-clothed woman underneath. Initially, it had been thought that she'd been hit by a car, but an autopsy revealed she had been strangled to death, severely beaten, and sexually assaulted. It had been the second vicious attack in the area that week, and there was concern that the crimes had been in the work of a serial predator, but it was later determined that the attacks were either a coincidence or a copycat. Elizabeth Ann was confirmed as the victim, but no one could figure out what had happened. The security guard hadn't gotten a good look at the driver the night that she'd gone missing. There had been no obvious signs of distress. Law enforcement had interviewed several suspects, but all were cleared. She had been a widow, her husband had died a little bit before her, and her 2 daughters were grown, married, and had families of their own. The state offered a $5,000 reward for any information that led to an arrest, but nothing solid came of it. DNA found at the scene was input into federal and state databases, and nothing came of it for years, until 2020 when they finally got a match from a recent convicted felon. Charles Eugene Coleman, now 66 years old, had been convicted of pointing and threatening a weapon. He was required to submit DNA at the time of his arrest, which connected him to the murder from 1976. Coleman had an extensive criminal history, which included a 12-year prison sentence for assault and battery in 1977. His other convictions were assault and battery with intent to kill, larceny, and other minor felonies. He was charged with the murder of Elizabeth Ann Howell Wilson in 2020, and in 2022 he entered an Alford plea, meaning he would not accept guilt, but acknowledge there was sufficient evidence to convict him and would accept the punishment. South Carolina law stated that he needed to be sentenced based on the laws in 1976, which gives him the option to be eligible for parole in 9 years. The sexual assault charges were dropped as part of the plea agreement.
I've already told the jury, and I would tell them again, that you are presumed innocent of this charge. I would tell them that the state is required to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
He has already served 16 months and will be eligible for parole in 2029. Wilson's daughter spoke after the trial, expressing relief that there was some justice in her mother's brutal murder.
It'll be better. It's over. It's over now. I was scared, didn't know who to do it. Nobody knows what that's like till they walk that walk.
Well, that is it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like the content and what I do over here, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. If you could give a like if you enjoyed the content, that would be much appreciated. We also have channel membership as well as Patreon if you want to get more behind the scenes content as well as exclusive content or just support the channel. In the description box of this video, you will also find links to all my socials to connect with me. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.